Lila Monroe wiped her hands on her apron and glanced at the clock hanging above the diner's counter. It was almost closing time, but a few stragglers still lingered over their meals. The air smelled of greasy fries, coffee, and the faint tang of cleaning supplies. Lila sighed quietly to herself as she picked up a tray of dirty dishes from one of the booths. She had been working at Denny's diner for 3 years now, ever since her mom passed away, leaving her responsible for taking care of her younger brother, Elijah. Elijah was only 12, full of energy and questions that Lila didn't always have answers to. But she did her best. Between her shifts at the diner and the occasional babysitting gig, she managed to scrape together enough money to keep them afloat. Life wasn't easy, but Lila had learned how to handle whatever came her way. Still, some days felt heavier than others, like tonight. The diner was quiet except for the low hum of conversation and the clinking of silverware against plates. Most of the customers were regulars, truck drivers stopping for a quick bite, couples sharing milkshakes, or lonely travelers looking for a warm place to sit. Lila knew most of them by name, or at least by face. As she cleared another table, she noticed movement near the entrance out of the corner of her eye. A man shuffled through the door, his head bowed low. He wore a tattered coat that looked too thin for the cold weather outside, and his shoes were scuffed and worn. His hair was unkempt, sticking out in all directions, and his beard covered most of his face. To anyone else, he might have looked like just another homeless person wandering in off the street. But something about him caught Lila's attention. There was an odd stiffness to the way he moved, like he was trying not to draw attention to himself. And when he finally lifted his head, his eyes locked onto hers for a brief moment. They weren't dull or lifeless like she expected. They were sharp, almost piercing, as if he could see right through her. "Can I help you?" asked Mrs. Hargrove, the manager, stepping forward with a polite but firm smile. Her voice carried just enough authority to make it clear she meant business. "We're about to close, sir." The man hesitated, glancing around the room before settling his gaze back on Mrs. Hargrove. I just need a moment," he said softly, his voice rough but surprisingly calm. Without waiting for permission, he walked past her and took a seat at one of the empty booths near the window. Mrs. Hargrove frowned, clearly uncomfortable. She glanced toward Lila, who was standing nearby pretending to organize menus. "Lila," she whispered, gesturing subtly toward the man. "See if he has any money. If not, we'll need to ask him to leave." Lila nodded reluctantly. She didn't like turning people away, especially when they looked like they hadn't eaten in days. But rules were rules, and Mrs. Hargrove ran a tight ship. Taking a deep breath, Lila approached the booth where the man sat. Up close, she could see the details she'd missed before. The dirt smudged across his cheeks, the frayed edges of his sleeves, the way his hands trembled slightly as he clasped them together on the tabletop. "Hi," Lila said gently, forcing a small smile. "Can I get you something to drink while you look over the menu?" The man blinked slowly, as if processing her words. Then he shook his head. "No, thank you," he replied. His voice was quieter now, almost hesitant. "Just water, perhaps?" Lila nodded and turned to grab a glass from behind the counter. As she filled it with water, she couldn't shake the feeling that this man wasn't what he seemed. Sure, he looked homeless, but there was something about the way he spoke. His careful choice of words, the slight accent she couldn't quite place, that made her wonder if there was more to his story. When she returned with the glass, she placed it gently on the table in front of him. "Here you go," she said, keeping her tone light. "Let me know if you change your mind about ordering anything." The man nodded briefly, murmuring a soft, "Thank you," before picking up the glass. For a moment, he stared at the water, as if debating whether to drink it. Then, without warning, Mrs. Hargrove appeared beside Lila, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. "I'm sorry, sir," she began, her voice clipped and professional, "but we can't allow loitering here. If you're not planning to order a meal, I'm afraid I'll have to ask you to leave." Lila winced inwardly. She hated scenes like this, especially when they involved people who were clearly down on their luck. The man set the glass down carefully and looked up at Mrs. Hargrove. His expression remained calm, but there was a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes, something that sent a shiver down Lila's spine. Before the man could respond, Lila stepped forward, surprising even herself. "Actually, Mrs. Hargrove," she interjected quickly, "he's with me. We're waiting for someone else to join us." Mrs. Hargrove raised an eyebrow, clearly skeptical. "Is that so? Who exactly are you expecting?" Lila hesitated, scrambling for an excuse. My cousin. He should be here any minute." She turned to the man, hoping he would play along. "Right?" To her relief, the man gave a slow nod. "Yes," he said simply. "My apologies for the delay. Traffic was worse than anticipated." Mrs. Hargrove narrowed her eyes, but eventually relented. "Fine," she muttered, shooting Lila a warning glance. "But don't let him stay too long. We're closing soon." As Mrs. Hargrove walked away, Lila let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. She slid into the booth across from the man, feeling both nervous and curious. "You okay?" she asked after a moment. The man studied her for a long moment, his intense gaze making her feel oddly exposed. Finally, he nodded. "You've done me a great kindness tonight," he said, his voice steady despite its roughness. "And I won't forget it." Lila shrugged, trying to play it cool. "It's no big deal. Everyone deserves a break sometimes." The man didn't respond immediately. Instead, he reached into the pocket of his coat and pulled out a small object wrapped in a faded handkerchief. Carefully, he unfolded the fabric to reveal a metallic device no larger than a keychain. It shimmered faintly under the diner's fluorescent lights, its surface engraved with intricate symbols that Lila didn't recognize. "What is that?" she asked, leaning closer despite herself. "It's important," the man replied cryptically. "More important than you realize. Hold on to it for now. And remember, tonight changes everything." Before Lila could press him for more information, the bell above the diner's door jingled, signaling the arrival of another customer. The man slipped the device into her hand and stood abruptly. "Thank you again," he said, his voice barely audible. Then, without another word, he disappeared, out the door, leaving Lila alone with the mysterious object and a growing sense of unease. Lila stared at the small metallic object in her hand, her mind racing. The diner was almost empty now, with only a few customers lingering over their coffee. She glanced toward the door where the man, Harold, she thought he might have called himself, had disappeared just moments ago. He hadn't even given her a chance to ask questions or figure out what was going on. All she had was this strange device and his vague warning. Tonight changes everything. She slipped the object into her apron pocket, trying to act normal, as she went back to clearing tables. But her thoughts were anything but calm. Who was that man? What was this thing he'd handed her? And why did it feel like her life had just taken a sharp turn without her permission? Mrs. Hargrove gave her a sideways glance as Lila walked past the counter. "Everything okay?" she asked, her tone halfway between concern and suspicion. "Yeah," Lila replied quickly, forcing a smile. "Just tired." Mrs. Hargrove nodded, though her expression suggested she didn't entirely believe her. "Well, hurry up and finish. Those tables. We're closing in 10 minutes. Lila nodded and got back to work, but her mind kept drifting back to Harold and the mysterious device. It wasn't until she locked up the diner an hour later that she finally allowed herself to take it out again. Standing under the dim streetlight outside, she held it up to examine it more closely. The symbols etched into its surface shimmered faintly, almost like they were alive. She ran her thumb over them, feeling a strange warmth radiating from the metal. "What are you?" she whispered to herself, half expecting it to answer. The streets were quiet as she made her way home, the cold wind biting at her cheeks. Her apartment wasn't far from the diner, a small one-bedroom place she shared with Elijah. As she turned onto her block, she noticed something odd. 2 men standing near the entrance to her building. They weren't dressed like the usual neighbors. Instead, they wore dark suits and sunglasses despite the late hour. One of them held a clipboard, while the other scanned the area with sharp, calculating eyes. Lila's heart skipped a beat. She slowed her pace, pretending to adjust her bag as she tried to figure out what to do. Were they waiting for her? Did they know about the device? She didn't have any answers, but every instinct told her to stay away for now. Instead of heading straight home, she crossed the street and ducked into a nearby convenience store. From inside, she watched the two men through the window. They seemed impatient, glancing at their watches and exchanging quiet words. After a few minutes, one of them pulled out a phone and started talking animatedly. Lila couldn't hear what they were saying, but the urgency in their gestures made her stomach churn. "Do you need help with something?" the store clerk asked, eyeing her curiously. "Oh no," Lila said quickly, grabbing a random candy bar from the shelf. "Just browsing." She paid for the candy and lingered by the door, debating her next move. If those men were really there for her, she couldn't lead them back to Elijah. Her little brother meant everything to her, and the last thing she wanted was to put him in danger. But where could she go? She didn't have many options, or allies. After another 10 minutes, the men finally moved away from the building and climbed into a black sedan parked across the street. Lila waited until the car drove off before hurrying upstairs to her apartment. When she opened the door, Elijah was sitting on the couch, engrossed in a video game. "Hey," he said without looking up. "You're late." "Sorry," Lila replied, closing the door behind her. She locked it twice just to be safe. "Had to deal with some stuff at work." Elijah paused his game and looked at her, noticing the tension in her voice. "What's wrong?" "Nothing," Lila lied, forcing a smile. She tossed her bag onto the table and headed to the kitchen. "Just tired." But Elijah wasn't convinced. At 12 years old, he was smart enough to read his sister's moods. "You sure?" he pressed, following her. "You look freaked out." Lila hesitated, torn between telling him the truth and protecting him from whatever trouble she might be in. Finally, she decided to stick to the basics. "I met someone weird tonight," she admitted, "and I think he might have gotten me involved in something I don't understand." Elijah frowned. "Like what?" "I don't know yet," Lila said, pulling the device from her pocket and setting it on the counter. "This guy gave me this, said it was important. Then these creepy guys showed up outside our building, and I'm pretty sure they're looking for it. Or me." Elijah picked up the device, turning it over in his hands. "What does it do?" "That's the thing," Lila said, running a hand through her hair. "I have no idea. It doesn't look like anything I've ever seen before." For a moment, they both stared at the object in silence. Then Elijah grinned mischievously. "Maybe it's alien tech." Lila rolled her eyes. "Don't start." "No, seriously," Elijah insisted. "Think about it. Weird guy gives you a shiny gadget, then mysterious dudes show up. Sounds like something out of a movie." Lila couldn't help but laugh. Leave it to her brother to make light of a potentially dangerous situation. Still, his comment planted a seed of doubt in her mind. Alien tech? That was ridiculous, wasn't it? Before she could dwell on it further, there was a knock at the door. Both Lila and Elijah froze, staring at each other wide-eyed. The knock came again, louder this time. "Who is it?" Lila called, her voice trembling slightly. "Delivery," came the reply, a deep, unfamiliar voice. Lila glanced at the clock. It was nearly midnight. No one delivered this late. Slowly, she crept toward the door, peering through the peephole. Standing outside were the same two men from earlier, their faces grim and unsmiling. Her heart pounded as she backed away from the door. "Elijah," she whispered urgently. "Go to your room and lock the door. Now." "But go," she hissed, shoving him gently toward his bedroom. Once he was safely inside, she grabbed the device from the counter and stuffed it into her jacket pocket. Then she turned off all the lights, plunging the apartment into darkness. The knocking grew more insistent. "Miss Monroe," one of the men called. "We just want to talk." Lila ignored them, crouching low as she moved toward the fire escape window. She didn't trust these men, not one bit. Whatever they wanted, it couldn't be good. Sliding. The window open as quietly as possible, she climbed out onto the fire escape, her breath fogging in the cold night air. From below, She heard voices growing louder. The men must have realized she wasn't answering and were searching for another way in. She didn't have much time. Climbing down the ladder, Lila hit the ground and took off running, clutching the device tightly in her pocket. She didn't know where she was going or what she would do next. All she knew was that she had to keep moving. For Elijah's sake, she couldn't let them catch her. As she darted around corners and through alleyways, her mind raced. Who were these men? What did they want with her? And most importantly, what exactly had Harold gotten her into? For the first time in her life, Lila felt completely out of her depth. But one thing was certain. Whatever happened next, her life would never be the same again. Lila ran as fast as her legs would carry her, her breath coming in short, sharp gasps. The cold night air stung her lungs, but she didn't dare slow down. Behind her, she could hear the faint sound of footsteps echoing through the empty streets. They were following her. She didn't know how they'd found her so quickly, but it didn't matter now. All that mattered was staying ahead. She darted into an alley, pressing herself against the wall to catch her breath. Her heart was pounding so hard she could feel it in her ears. Clutching the mysterious device tightly in her pocket, she tried to think. Where could she go? Who could she trust? These men weren't just random strangers, they seemed organized, professional, like they knew exactly what they were doing. And they clearly wanted whatever Harold had given her. The thought of Elijah back at the apartment made her stomach twist with guilt and fear. What if they went after him next? She couldn't let that happen. She had to keep moving, keep running, until she figured out what to do. Peering cautiously around the corner, Lila scanned the street for any sign of her pursuers. For now, it looked clear. Taking a deep breath, she stepped out of the alley and started walking briskly, keeping her head down. She needed somewhere safe, somewhere they wouldn't think to look. But where? Her mind raced through possibilities. A friend's house? No. She didn't want to drag anyone else into this mess. The police? That felt like a bad idea too. Something about these men told her they weren't the kind of people who could be stopped by flashing badges or handcuffs. Besides, how would she even explain the situation? Two guys in suits are chasing me because of a weird gadget I got from a homeless man. It sounded insane, even to her. As she turned another corner, she spotted a small park up ahead. Maybe she could hide there for a while, at least until she came up with a better plan. Ducking behind a row of bushes, she crouched low, trying to steady her breathing. The park was quiet, deserted except for the occasional rustle of leaves in the wind. For a moment, she allowed herself to relax, just slightly. But then she heard, it was the unmistakable crunch of footsteps on gravel. Her blood ran cold. They'd found her again. Without thinking, Lila bolted from her hiding spot, weaving between trees and benches as she searched for another way out. The footsteps grew louder, closer. She could hear voices now, low and urgent, calling to each other. They were spreading out, trying to cut her off. Panic surged through her as she realized she was trapped. There was no clear exit, no place to run. Desperation took over and she ducked into a narrow gap between two park benches, pulling her knees to her chest and holding her breath. If they didn't see her, maybe they'd pass her by. For several agonizing minutes, she sat there listening as the footsteps circled nearby. Every sound felt impossibly loud. The scrape of shoes on pavement, the rustle of fabric, the murmur of voices. Her hand tightened around the device in her pocket, her fingers brushing against its smooth surface. What was this thing? Why did everyone seem so obsessed with it? And then it happened. Without meaning to, she pressed one of the symbols etched into the device. A soft hum filled the air, growing louder and more intense with each passing second. Startled, Lila pulled it out of her pocket, staring at it in shock as it began to glow. The light was blinding, pulsing brighter and brighter until it enveloped her completely. For a moment, everything disappeared. The world around her dissolved into a blur of colors and sounds, spinning faster and faster until she felt like she might lose consciousness. Then, as suddenly as it had started, the light faded. When Lila opened her eyes, she was no longer in The park. She wasn't even in Chicago or anywhere on Earth as far as she could tell. She stood in the middle of a sprawling city unlike anything she'd ever seen. Towering buildings stretched high into the sky, their surfaces shimmering with iridescent hues that shifted like liquid rainbows. Strange vehicles zipped through the air, hovering silently above the streets below. People, or at least creatures that resembled people, walked past her, their clothing sleek and futuristic, their faces calm and composed. Lila's knees buckled beneath her, and she sank to the ground, overwhelmed by the sight. Was this real? Had she somehow traveled to another planet, or was she dreaming? None of it made sense. Before she could process what was happening, a group of figures approached her. They wore uniforms made of some kind of metallic fabric, their designs intricate and alien. One of them stepped forward, addressing her in a language she didn't understand. When she didn't respond, he switched to English, his accent strange but understandable. "Are you unharmed?" he asked, his tone calm but concerned. Lila stared at him, speechless. Finally, she managed to croak out a single word. "Where? You are aboard the Interstellar Alliance vessel Orion," the figure explained. "We detected unauthorized use of a dimensional gateway device and traced its activation to your location." What?" Lila stammered, her mind struggling to keep up. "The device you hold is a prototype teleportation module," the man continued. "It allows for instantaneous travel across vast distances, including between dimensions." Lila glanced down at the object still clutched in her hand. So it really was alien tech. Somehow she wasn't surprised anymore. "But why did it bring me here?" she asked, her voice trembling. The man hesitated, glancing at his companions before answering. "That is complicated. Suffice it to say, your actions have drawn significant attention, not only from us, but also from others who may not share our intentions." "What do you mean, others?" Lila demanded, her fear giving way to frustration. "Who are you people? And why does everyone seem so interested in this thing?" "We are protectors of peace among the stars," the man replied. "But there are factions within the galaxy who seek power at any cost. The device you possess is highly valuable and dangerous in the wrong hands." Lila shook her head, feeling dizzy. This was too much, too big, too impossible. "I don't care about any of that," she said firmly. "I just want to go home." "That may not be possible," the man admitted. "Your activation of the device has exposed Earth to forces beyond your comprehension. Returning you without addressing the consequences could put your entire planet at risk." Lila's stomach dropped. "What are you saying? That I'm stuck? Here?" "For now," the man said. "But we will help you. You have been thrust into a situation far beyond your control, yet your actions thus far suggest potential. Potential that may prove vital in safeguarding both your world and ours." Lila didn't know whether to laugh or cry. This couldn't be real. Yet here she was, standing on an alien planet, or spaceship, or wherever this was, with no idea how to get back home. And apparently the fate of Earth rested on her shoulders. As the weight of the situation settled over her, Lila realized she had no choice but to trust these strangers. For now. Whether she liked it or not, her life had changed forever. Lila sat on the edge of a sleek metallic bench in what she assumed was some kind of waiting area aboard the Orion. The room was quiet except for the soft hum of machinery and the occasional whoosh of air passing through unseen vents. Everything around her gleamed with an otherworldly polish, smooth surfaces, glowing panels, and strange symbols that pulsed faintly like they were alive. It felt surreal, like stepping into a dream she couldn't wake up from. She held the device tightly, in her hands turning it over again and again as if studying it might make everything make sense. But no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't wrap her head around what was happening. One moment she was running for her life in a dark alley back in Chicago. The next, she was sitting on an alien spaceship, surrounded by beings who spoke, of interstellar alliances and dimensional gateways. It was too much to process. The man who had spoken to her earlier, his name was Commander Joran, he'd said, had explained that Earth wasn't supposed to know about the existence of advanced civilizations beyond its own solar system. Humanity was still considered undeveloped by galactic standards, which meant interactions were strictly forbidden unless absolutely necessary. By activating the device, Lila had broken one of the most fundamental rules of interstellar law. Why? Me, she muttered under her breath, shaking her head. Why does this always happen to people like me? Her thoughts kept circling back to Elijah. What would he think when he realized she hadn't come home? Would those men in suits go after him? She clenched her fists at the thought, anger bubbling up inside her. If anything happened to her brother because of this, whatever this was, she didn't know what she'd do. Before she could spiral further into worry, the door slid open. With a soft hiss, and Commander Joran stepped inside. He was tall, with pale blue skin and sharp, angular features that made him look almost regal. His uniform shimmered faintly, reflecting the light in a way that made it seem like liquid metal. Despite his intimidating appearance, his expression was calm and patient. "We need to discuss your options," he said, taking a seat across from her. "There are decisions to be made, and time is not on our side." Lila looked up at him, her brow furrowed. "Options? What options? You already said I can't go home." "That is true," Joran replied evenly. "At least not immediately. However, you have two paths forward. The first is to remain here temporarily while we assess the situation and determine how best to protect Earth from potential threats. During this time, you will undergo training to better understand the technology and responsibilities now tied to your actions." "And the second option?" Lila asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to hear the answer. "The second option," Joran continued, his tone growing more serious, "is to return to Earth and pretend none of this ever happened. We would erase your memory of these events and leave you to live out your life as before. But be warned, if you choose this path, Earth will be left vulnerable. Those pursuing you will not stop until they achieve their goals, regardless of the cost." Lila stared at him, her mind racing. Erasing her memory sounded tempting. It would mean going back to her normal life, forgetting all about aliens and spaceships and dangerous devices, but she couldn't ignore the weight of responsibility pressing down on her. If staying meant protecting Elijah, protecting Earth, how could she walk away? "What happens if I stay?" she asked finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Joran leaned forward slightly, his piercing eyes locking onto hers. "If you stay, you will become part of the Interstellar Alliance. You will learn skills far beyond what you've known on Earth. You will face challenges that test your courage and resolve, and you will play a key role in safeguarding your planet from those who seek to exploit it." Lila swallowed hard, her heart pounding. This wasn't a decision she could make lightly. Staying meant leaving behind everything she'd ever known, her job, her home, her brother. But returning to Earth without doing something to stop the threat felt wrong, selfish even. She thought about Harold, the mysterious man who had given her the device in the first place. Why had he trusted her with it? What did he see in her that made him believe she could handle this? "I'll stay," she said finally, surprising even herself. "But I need to know. I need to make sure my brother is safe. I can't just abandon him." Joran nodded, as if he'd expected her answer. "We anticipated this concern. Your brother will be monitored and protected by our agents. They will ensure his safety without revealing our presence. Once the immediate threat has passed, arrangements can be made for you to communicate with him indirectly." It wasn't perfect, but it was the best offer she was going to get. Taking a deep breath, Lila stood up, clutching the device tightly in her hand. "Okay," she said firmly. "Let's do this." Over the next few days, or what Lila assumed were days, time seemed different here. She began her training. It started with basic lessons about the technology she now carried. The device she learned was called a chronolink. It was designed to create portals between dimensions, allowing instantaneous travel across vast distances. While incredibly powerful, it was also highly unstable, requiring precise control to avoid catastrophic consequences. Her instructors were patient but strict, pushing her to master concepts that felt impossible at first. She struggled with the terminology and the physics behind the technology, but she had a knack for problem-solving and an uncanny ability to adapt quickly. Slowly but surely, she began to understand how the chronolink worked and why it was so valuable. Beyond the technical aspects, she also learned about the factions vying for control of the galaxy. The Interstellar Alliance, led by species like Jorans, sought to maintain peace and stability among the stars. Opposing them were groups like the Krylos Syndicate, ruthless mercenaries and power-hungry warlords who cared only about domination. These were the others Joran had mentioned, the ones who had sent agents to Earth in pursuit of the chronolink. As the days passed, Lila grew more confident in her abilities. She discovered strengths she never knew she had: resilience, determination, and a fierce loyalty to those she cared about. For the first time in her life, she felt like she belonged somewhere, even if that somewhere was millions of miles away from home. But just as she was starting to settle into her new reality, trouble found her again. One evening, during a routine simulation exercise, alarms blared throughout the ship. Red lights flashed overhead, casting eerie shadows across the corridors. Lila froze, unsure of what to do. Before she could react, Joran appeared beside her, his expression grim. "They've found us," he said tersely. "Prepare yourself. We may need your help sooner than expected." Lila's stomach dropped. Who had found them? The Krylos Syndicate, or someone else entirely? Whatever the case, one thing was clear. Her journey was far from over. The alarms continued to blare as Lila followed Commander Joran through the winding corridors of the Orion. Her heart raced, each step feeling heavier than the last. She had been on edge ever since arriving here, but this was different. This wasn't a training exercise or a lecture. It was real danger, and she could feel it in the air. "What's happening?" Lila asked, struggling to keep up with Joran's long strides. "Who found us?" "The Krylos Syndicate," Joran replied. Without slowing down, his voice was calm, but there was an urgency beneath it that made her pulse quicken. "They've tracked the chronolink as energy signature to our location. We don't know how they managed to bypass our defenses, but they're closing in. Fast." Lila clutched the device tightly in her hand, its cool metal surface pressing against her palm. She had spent days learning about the factions vying for control of the galaxy, and none of them sounded worse than the Krylos Syndicate. They were brutal, relentless, and willing to do whatever it took to get what they wanted. And right now, what they wanted was her and the chronolink. As they reached a large chamber filled with glowing panels and holographic displays, Lila saw a group of uniformed figures gathered around a central console. Their faces were tense, their movements sharp and deliberate. One of them glanced up as Joran entered, his expression grim. "Commander," the figure said, nodding toward Joran. "We've detected multiple ships approaching from the outer perimeter. They'll be within firing range in less than 5 minutes." Joran nodded, his jaw tightening. "Activate the defensive protocols, divert all available power to the shields, and prepare the evacuation pods, just in case." "Evacuation pods?" Lila repeated, her voice rising in panic. "You mean we might have to abandon ship?" "It's a precaution," Joran assured her, though his tone didn't exactly inspire confidence. "If things go south, we need to ensure the survival of key personnel, including you." "Me?" Lila asked, stunned. "Why me? I'm not key personnel." "You underestimate yourself," Joran said firmly. "You hold the chronolink. Without you, the Alliance loses its best chance of stopping the Syndicate. Your role is critical, whether you realize it or not." Before Lila could argue further, the lights flickered, and the ship shuddered violently. Someone shouted something about an incoming attack, and the room erupted into chaos. Panels sparked, alarms screamed louder, and the hum of machinery grew erratic. Lila stumbled, grabbing onto a nearby railing to steady herself. "Stay close," Joran ordered, grabbing her arm and pulling her toward a smaller side room. Inside, several screens displayed live footage of the space outside the ship. Dozens of sleek, menacing vessels surrounded the Orion, their weapons charging ominously. Lila felt a chill run down her spine as she watched the scene unfold. "Can't fight them off forever," one of the crew members muttered, his hands flying over the controls. "Their numbers are too great." Joran turned to Lila, his piercing eyes locking onto hers. "Listen carefully," he said, his voice low but urgent. "If we lose this battle, the chronolink cannot fall into their hands. You understand me?" Lila nodded, though her mind was racing. "What do you want me to do?" "There's a failsafe built into the device," Joran explained quickly. "If activated, it will destroy the chronolink and render it useless, but it must be done manually. You'll need to press these 3 symbols in sequence." He pointed to the engravings on the device, highlighting the specific ones. "Do you remember?" "Yes," Lila said, though her voice trembled. "But what happens if I use it? Will it hurt me?" "No," Joran replied. "But once activated, the process is irreversible. The chronolink will be gone forever. Are you ready for that responsibility?" Lila hesitated, staring at the device in her hand. Destroying it would mean losing any chance of returning home. It would also mean giving up the only thing tying her to Harold, the mysterious man who had started all of this. But if it meant keeping the chronolink out of the wrong hands, she knew what she had to do. "I'm ready," she said finally, her voice steadier than she expected. "Good," Joran said, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Now stay here until I give the signal. Trust your instincts, Lila. You're stronger than you think." With that, he turned and hurried back, out into the main chamber, leaving Lila alone with her thoughts. She leaned against the wall, clutching the chronolink tightly as she listened to the sounds of battle raging outside. Explosions echoed through the ship, followed by the screech of metal tearing apart. Each noise sent a fresh wave of fear coursing through her body. Minutes passed like hours, though Lila couldn't tell how much time had actually gone by. Then suddenly the door slid open and Joran reappeared, his face pale and streaked with sweat. Behind him, smoke poured into the corridor, and the distant sound of shouting grew louder. "They've breached the hull," Joran said urgently. "We need to move, now!" He grabbed Lila's arm and pulled her toward another hallway, dodging falling debris and sparks along the way. The ship groaned under the strain of the attack, its systems failing rapidly. As they ran, Lila spotted a group of enemy soldiers storming through a nearby intersection. Their armor gleamed menacingly, and their weapons glowed with an eerie blue light. "Intruders ahead," someone shouted, and the sound of blaster fire filled the air. Joran pushed Lila behind a stack of crates, shielding her from view. "Stay down," he ordered, drawing a weapon of his own. He exchanged fire with the attackers, his aim steady despite the chaos around them. Lila crouched low, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst. She knew she couldn't stay hidden forever. Then, amidst the confusion, she noticed something, a faint blinking light on the chronolink. It hadn't done that before. Was it reacting to the proximity of the enemy ships? Or was it signaling something else entirely? Acting on instinct, Lila pressed one of the symbols on the device. Immediately, a holographic map appeared in front of her, displaying coordinates and pathways she didn't recognize. A single red dot pulsed in the center of the screen, accompanied by a message written in unfamiliar symbols. "What is this?" she whispered to herself, squinting at the display. Before she could decipher more, Joran grabbed her again, pulling her to her feet. "We have to go," he urged, dragging her toward a nearby escape pod. "The ship won't hold much longer." Lila hesitated, torn between following Joran and figuring out what the chronolink was trying to tell her. But the decision was made for her when another explosion rocked the ship, sending both of them sprawling to the ground. Sparks rained down from the ceiling and the acrid smell of burning metal filled the air. "Get in," Joran shouted, shoving her into the small escape pod. As he sealed the hatch behind them, Lila caught one last glimpse of the chaos outside, the flashing lights, the smoke, the relentless advance of the enemy soldiers. Then, with a jolt, the pod launched itself into space, leaving the doomed Orion behind. Through the small window, Lila watched as the once majestic ship crumbled under the weight of the attack, its wreckage drifting silently into the void. Her chest tightened as tears welled up in her eyes. So many lives lost. So much destruction. And for what? For a piece of alien technology she barely understood? But even as grief threatened to overwhelm her, Lila forced herself to focus. She still had the chronolink. She still had a chance to make things right. Whatever those coordinates meant, wherever that red dot led, she knew one thing for certain. Her journey was far from over. The escape pod drifted silently through the vast emptiness of space, its small engines humming faintly as it followed a pre-programmed trajectory. Inside, Lila sat hunched over the chronolink, her eyes fixed on the glowing holographic map that hovered in front of her. The red dot still pulsed steadily at the center, surrounded by swirling lines and symbols she couldn't decipher. She didn't know where it was leading her, or if it was even safe, but she had no other choice but to trust it. Her mind kept replaying the events of the past few hours. The attack on the Orion, the desperate fight to survive, Joran's final shout as he shoved her into the pod. Was he alive? Had anyone else made it out? She clenched her fists, trying to push the guilt and sadness aside. There would be time to grieve later, if there was a later. For now, she had to focus on surviving. "Where are you taking me?" she muttered under her breath, tracing the blinking red dot with her finger. The coordinates seemed to point toward a distant planet, one she hadn't heard about during her training. It wasn't Earth, that much was clear, but beyond that she had no idea what awaited her. As the pod continued its journey, Lila leaned back against the cold metal wall and closed her eyes. Exhaustion weighed heavily on her body, but sleep felt impossible. Every time she tried to relax, her thoughts spiraled back to Elijah, to Chicago, to the life she'd left behind. Would she ever see him again? Or had Harold's mysterious gift cost her everything? Hours passed, or maybe days. Time was hard to measure in the endless void of space. Finally, the pod began to slow, its systems adjusting as it approached its destination. Through the small window, Lila caught her first glimpse of the planet below. It was unlike anything she'd ever seen, a swirling mass of deep blues and greens, dotted with patches of shimmering silver. Clouds stretched across its surface like ribbons, reflecting light from the nearby star system. "It's beautiful," she whispered, pressing her face closer to the glass. But beauty didn't mean safety. For all she knew, this place could be just as dangerous as the Krylos Syndicate. The pod entered the atmosphere, shaking violently as heat flared around its hull. Lila gripped the edges of her seat, bracing herself for impact. When the shaking finally subsided, the pod landed with a soft thud on solid ground. Outside, the air was thick and humid, carrying the scent of something earthy and unfamiliar. Taking a deep breath, Lila activated the hatch and stepped outside. Her boots sank slightly into the soft soil beneath her feet, and she looked around in awe. Towering trees with iridescent leaves stretched high into the sky, their branches glowing, faintly as if lit from within. Strange creatures darted between the foliage, some resembling birds, others completely alien, and the air buzzed with sounds she couldn't identify. But what caught her attention most was the structure ahead. Rising from the center of the clearing was a massive dome-shaped building, its surface covered in intricate patterns that shifted and changed like waves of liquid light. At the entrance stood two figures cloaked in flowing robes that shimmered like water. They turned to face her as she approached, their faces hidden beneath hoods. "Lila Monroe," one of them said, their voice calm and melodic. "We've been expecting you." Lila froze, her hand instinctively reaching for the chronolink. "Expecting me? How do you know my name?" "We are the keepers of the Nexus," the figure replied, lowering their hood to reveal smooth, pale skin and eyes that glowed faintly. "Harold came to us before his departure from your world. He entrusted us with knowledge of your arrival and your role in restoring balance to the galaxy." "Harold?" Lila repeated, stunned. "You know him?" "Yes," the second keeper said, stepping forward. "He is one of us, a guardian who has walked among countless worlds, protecting the fragile threads that bind them together." When he gave you the chronolink, he believed you were capable of great things. Lila shook her head, overwhelmed. I don't understand. What does any of this have to do with me? I'm just nobody. You are more than you realize, the first keeper said gently. The chronolink chose you for a reason. Its power responds not only to skill but to heart. You have shown courage, compassion, and determination, qualities essential for the task ahead. What task? Lila asked, her voice trembling. What am I supposed to do? The Krylos Syndicate seeks to exploit the Nexus, a gateway, connecting all dimensions for their own gain, the second keeper explained. If they succeed, the consequences will ripple across every corner of existence. Your mission is to prevent that from happening. How? Lila demanded, frustration creeping into her tone. I don't even know how to use this thing properly. That is why we are here, the first keeper said, gesturing toward the dome. Come, we will teach you everything you need to know. Reluctantly, Lila followed them inside. The interior of the dome was unlike anything she'd imagined. Walls of shifting light, floating platforms, and streams of energy that pulsed rhythmically like living beings. In the center of the room stood a pedestal, upon which rested another device similar to the chronolink. This one, however, was larger and radiated a warm, golden glow. This is the Nexus Core, the first keeper explained. It serves as the foundation for all dimensional gateways. To stop the Syndicate, you must activate its protective protocols using the chronolink. But beware, the process requires precision and sacrifice. Failure will result in catastrophic destabilization. Lila stared at the core, her stomach twisting with dread. Sacrifice? What did that mean? Would she lose the ability to return home, forever, or worse? Before she could ask, an alarm blared throughout the dome. The keepers exchanged worried glances. They've found us, the second keeper said grimly. You must act quickly. No pressure, right? Lila muttered, clutching the chronolink tightly. She turned to the keepers, her resolve hardening. Tell me what to do. The instructions came fast and clear. Using the chronolink, Lila had to synchronize its energy signature with the Nexus Core, creating a shield that would block the Syndicate's access. It sounded simple enough, but the margin for error was razor thin. One wrong move and both devices could overload. With the keepers guiding her, Lila positioned herself in front of the core and activated the chronolink. A surge of energy coursed through her body, making her hair stand on end. Symbols lit up on the device, aligning with those on the core as beams of light connected the two. The room vibrated with power, growing brighter and louder with each passing second. Then, without warning, the doors burst open, and a group of Krylos soldiers stormed in, weapons raised. Their leader, a towering figure clad in black armor, spotted Lila immediately. Stop her, he bellowed, firing a shot in her direction. One of the keepers stepped in front of Lila, raising a hand to deflect the blast. Finish the sequence, they shouted. We'll hold them off. Tears streamed down Lila's face as she focused on the task at hand. She pressed the final symbol on the chronolink, and a brilliant flash of light engulfed the room. For a moment, everything went silent. When the light faded, the soldiers were gone, along with the keepers. The Nexus Core hummed softly, its golden glow steady and serene. Lila collapsed to her knees, exhausted but alive. In the days that followed, Lila learned that the Syndicate had been neutralized, at least for now. The Nexus was secure thanks to her actions. As for Harold, he reappeared briefly to thank her, his piercing gaze filled with pride. You've done well, he said simply. Better than I could have hoped. Does this mean I can go home? Lila asked, her voice cracking. Harold hesitated. That choice is yours to make. But remember, the galaxy needs guardians like you. Heroes willing to stand between chaos and peace. Lila thought about Elijah, about Earth, about the life she'd left behind. Then she thought about everything she'd seen and done since that fateful night at Denny's diner. Slowly, she nodded. I'll stay, she said firmly. For now. And with that, Lila Monroe stepped into her new role, not as a waitress or a runaway, but as a protector of worlds.